Hello and welcome back to the third rail. Christmas is around the corner, and judging by the channel videos people are watching the most at the moment, it looks like planning for the big event is in full swing. So this might be the right time to look at basic servicing again. Now, you might remember this model I have in front of me. This is an E52 from set 2660, which featured in a few videos some time ago. At the time, some of you had mentioned you wanted to see its servicing end to end. So the day has finally arrived to put unused footage to good use. I am going to cover basic servicing steps that would apply to most Märklin models, as well as a few quirks for this tooling. This tooling was used for several models between 1983 and 1994. We have the BR152 of the Deutsche Bundesbahn, that's model number 3366, that came in two versions, and this E52, which would have been included in set 2660 for the digital version and set 2860 for the analog version. This video might not contain any new information for some of you, but if you like maintenance, who knows, you might find this entertaining as it is. If you were tempted to leave us here, may I suggest this video I published recently, where you'll be able to discover a large choice of Märklin ÖBB models from the 1980s. Okay, let's go! So, when does a model need a service? In general, if a model runs louder or slower than usual, needs more power, or slips in places it managed well before, then it is more than likely that the time for a service has arrived. Service intervals vary depending on use and environmental conditions. For our model, based on the initial test, I know that the locomotive is quite loud. I also noticed that the motor cuts off in places, and the throttle response seems a bit delayed too. So let's have a closer look. Now, before reaching for a tool, I always spend some time inspecting the chassis. I pay particular attention to wheels and axles and check they are free. I should be able to wiggle axles from side to side and not feel any resistance. The leading wheels also need checking, as they often seize when models are not used for a long time. Now, if I were to find anything seized, I would follow steps I documented in a little helper video a while back. There's a card at the top of the screen now. Fortunately, in this case, everything is free, and this despite the model spending the last 30 years in its box. So let's have a peek inside. We're going to need to open the model. On most Altbau locomotives, these are models based on pre-World War II German electric locomotives. The body is held to the chassis with two screws, one at each end on the side of the leading wheels. One is here and the other one here. Now let me loosen them. Nothing is sticking. That's a good sign that the locomotive hasn't seen much used or has not been drenched in oil. That's very good. Now with the screw loosened, now the body should simply lift off. And it does, no problem. This reveals a standard Märklin arrangement. We have the decoder, I think it's a 6080 with its dip switches. The wiring looks original. Nothing has been tampered with by the looks of it. All the solder joints look as they did out of the factory. Now that's excellent. So, based on this quick inspection, I think all this model needs really is a simple standard service. So that's a clean of the motor, a bit of lubrication, probably a change of tires, And I'm going to start with the motor and work my way down to the chassis. No model comes with a full service history, and you can never be sure something sold as brand new or nearly new is actually in that state. So it is always a good idea to check things, even if something looks very good. With most electric and diesel locomotives, I would usually drop the motor bogie at this stage, so I have free access to everything. But on this model, things are engineered slightly differently. The bogie is directly attached to the chassis with a screw that doubles as its pivot point, and we have a spring in between the surface of the chassis on the other side and the motor windings. This would be in the way if I wanted to take the bogie out. I also think there wouldn't be enough clearance to slide the entire assembly out. The purpose of this spring is to push the bogie down so that the driving wheels have good contact with the track, and this ensures good traction, of course. So for this model, the motor needs to be disassembled first in situ, and Märklin thought about this and gave us a very convenient access hole on the side of the chassis for one of the motor cover screws. Now, that's always a sign that the motor needs to be disassembled where it is. You'll find a similar arrangement on German and Swiss crocodiles from that period, albeit without a spring there. Now I'll start by releasing some slack on the wiring. The light fitting is made of plastic and can be simply pulled out of its slots in the chassis. On the motor plate, some of the wiring is held in place by a little interference suppression capacitor. It needs to be lifted very gently, just enough for the wires to be able to slide out. There we go. Now we can remove the brushes. There, that's the usual. Lift the brush springs out of the way and slide the brushes out. And of course, I dropped the first one. Never mind, I'll get it back later. The brushes look new. They've got the right length. These graphite brushes last a very long time, and I almost never replace them, unless they are below half their original length or look damaged. If they are covered in black residues or old oil, they can be simply wiped clean, and the brushes will then be as good as new. So now I can finally unscrew the motor plate. I'll take the screws out first of all. And now I can lift the motor plate away from the motor housing. And I can start sliding it out of the chassis. So it's just a matter of tilting it a bit and pulling it out gently with the help of the wires attached to the windings and the spring that pushes against the windings. The magnet will then follow automatically. Now all this needs to be done very gently to avoid breaking any solder joint, especially if you are not confident with soldering. So it's time for the cleaning to commence. Enter the customary cotton bud. The motor plate is quasi spotless. It's important to always check the inside of the motor plate, as it often gets forgotten in servicing. And the armature on its side has only minor deposits, So it looks like this locomotive really did not see much action, if at all. Good stuff, the seller didn't lie. Now, let's check the bogie. We'll check quickly that the gears and wheels are as free as they seem to be at first. And they are. So now we can have a look at the tires. I had checked them already when I first looked at the model in the first video, and they need changing. They should be tight and smooth. A good test is to apply gentle pressure with a flat tool and try and push the tire on one side or another. If it moves around the wheel without taking the wheel with it, then it needs changing. And as we can see here, all 4 tires are loose. Okay, so we're going to need to change them. The rods are in the way, so they'll need to come off first. And we'll use the middle-sized hex driver from the Märklin toolset. I don't know what size it is, if you are using anything else. With the rods out of the way, we can start pulling the tires off the wheels. And once that's done, we'll give the surface a quick wipe so we can install new tires. For this, the easiest is to hold one side of the tire in place and insert the tip of tweezers or a small screwdriver between the tire and the wheel. Then we can move the tool around the wheel and the tire will naturally slide into position without turning on itself. And then we'll need to check that the tires are positioned properly. And once that's done, we can reinstall the rods. Now I find putting the bolts back always fiddly. They either go in first time or I spend 30 minutes trying to find the thread. This is where a better tool might come in handy, but I haven't felt the need or curiosity to look for one until now. You might have an idea. You can leave a comment down below if you know of something cheap that could do the job better. When I get into trouble, I often end up simply using my fingers to gently insert the bolts or nuts, depending on what I'm working on, and try to find a thread this way. I have a better feel. And then I finish the job with the tool. Okay, looks like we're done. So now we can put the motor back together. So first I'll lubricate the ends of the armature with some grease. You could also use oil here, but I found grease lasts much longer. Whatever the product used, it is important to lubricate the armature ends. If this step is skipped, the motor will most certainly develop a loud whine. Okay, and now the fiddly bit. We need to place the spring back in place first. Then we'll compress it with the base of the windings. All this while positioning the magnet on the motor housing, using the locating pins to keep everything together. And with this construct almost like vaguely stable, we can reinsert the armature and finally place the motor cover back on. And after checking both motor and wheels turn freely, the screws can be reinstalled. and then we can reinsert the brushes. And then we can tidy up the wiring again and put the light fitting back in its original position. Cool! Now we can take care of the underside of the chassis. So there we need to pay particular attention to the trucks at both ends. Now this type of locomotive relies heavily on them for its connection to ground. And the truck axles and contact springs underneath, you could also call them pickups, need to be clean and free of oxidation. So looking at the springs, they are fine. So is the surface of the chassis under the trucks that would conduct the ground current back to the motor. So all we need to do here is just wipe the axles and our job will be done. Okay, all that is left to do now is lubrication. So I'll apply the tiniest drop of oil to all axles, as close as possible to their bearing. I'll also apply a drop of oil on the gears to reduce noise. Now that's not standard or recommended, but I found it helps. Your locomotive will work either way. Okay, so we can test the chassis now. All fine. Brilliant. So we can put the body back on. I haven't done it here, but it's a good idea to check the pantograph screws are tight, especially if you are going to use the locomotive with overhead wires. And there we are. We have a freshly serviced model on the track. We'll give it another quick back and forth. Cool, all fine. Now the model would need a quick run-in at this stage. That would be 10 minutes minimum in both directions, after which it would be ready to provide hours of enjoyment. Märklin states 40 hours between service. I'd say this would apply only to the axle lubrication. The motor will need a clean much earlier, probably already after 10 to 15 hours operation, maybe a bit more. But in most cases it would take months to get to that stage in any case. So that was it, a basic service. Now, if you want to see this model in action, have a look at the latest Deutsche Reichsbahn running session I uploaded a while back. And of course there are the videos I mentioned at the beginning today. That was it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, hopefully enough for you to give it a like. And maybe even subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks as ever for your support, and bye for now.